And I was not someone who would have considered myself able to write software 2 years ago. Could I do a little bit of data science? Absolutely. Was I doing some Python programming to look through and analyze data? Yes, but could I actually build a web app? Could I build a mobile app? No. Now I can. And what that means is any tool that doesn't very specifically address my needs out of the box incentivizes me to build my own. And I'm just one person. And I've seen that kind of proliferate through the organizations that I've worked with, in which the idea of build versus buy is leaning more strongly, at least in the early days, towards build than it is buy. Some of that's the unknown. Some of that's the excitement around what these AI tools have made possible. Some of the people that are just willing or kind of wanting, rather, to kind of own their thing, to have their kind of secret sauce imbued in a product that they develop. There's something novel and interesting about that. I think water will find its level, so to speak, in that, like, right now, the seesaw that is very heavily build, whereas before it was very heavily buy, will kind of arc back to kind of more of an equilibrium. But I do think that we are fundamentally in a different world in which a lot of SaaS apps for a long time were kind of crud database wrappers, right? Kind of no more than that. And I think we're headed for a reality in which what you have in the next state is large language models, or whatever the emergent systems become, wrappers. And people.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Scholar AI Founders Pod. Make sure to be listening and following wherever you listen to your typical podcasts. How's that intro, Damon? Okay? Nice. Cool. Today we're just
doing
with Damon.
Good.
We don't have Shashi today, but we figured it might be a pretty interesting conversation. Kind of like last week, we were talking with Shashi about how him and I would both code using AI. Damon is not someone who codes first. For those who don't know, Damon's a PhD candidate at Duke. He's studying biomedical engineering, so he's mostly in like wet lab work and running experiments. But things have recently changed that have made it very, very possible to be a technical person without knowing how to code, at least as far as software. So Damon, we'd love to just hear about how the journey has been for you so far with AI, where you were 2 years ago versus where you are now.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I mean, first off, I think you said it well in the sense that technical capabilities for people who might have been skilled in a particular area, the rate at which those people can upskill in other areas now, primarily software, is greater than ever before. Said quite simply, there are things that I can now build very fast that would have been impossible for me to build 2 years ago. And we've seen that come into practice internally by the use of new internal tools that have helped us kind of with go-to-market, with some distribution, with some content ideas. And we've also seen it kind of accelerate things that I think are not directly tethered to this business, but that enable kind of real world innovations. And what I mean by that is, in my PhD studies, I'm kind of duoing with these systems almost on a daily basis, in the sense that I'm asking them, what can I try? Right? What experiments can I run in the real world that would give me new data, that would give me new avenues to explore, and not necessarily relying on AI to provide the answers for those, but instead just as a brainstorming partner to say, what is possible? What am I not thinking about, right? What surface area hasn't been covered and that I wouldn't have otherwise thought about? And in that way, these things have become a really powerful tool. And in many ways, what I'm most excited for is the opportunity of these things to lead to new possibilities, some of which I think are easy to anticipate, and some of which we have, several years, maybe even decades before we realize.
Where do you think, there's a lot of just like hype in general in this space. And I think, especially with the O1 models, O3 models, there's all this talk about like they do scientific reasoning better than like most PhDs can. Have you found that like that's actually true? Like, have you ever tried using an O1 or an O3 model for any science?
Yeah, short answer, yes, I've tried it. Short answer, no, I don't think it's currently true. And what they are very good at is parsing data. So again, regularly I am uploading PDFs, scientific manuscripts into these systems. I am interacting with it in a way that is more conversational, allowing me to kind of get to the bottom of things without having to worry about getting caught up in technical jargon or some nuance that otherwise I would have been wading through for minutes to hours at a time, right? So now I can read papers across domains in a way that wasn't previously possible, right? So I'm basically more fluent now in various domains of science, whereas otherwise I was kind of specialized before. So I feel much better about kind of being again, across domains, I feel much better about pulling in insights that were previously kind of under discovered into my own work. And so in that way, I wouldn't classify that as reasoning. I would classify that as a kind of a tool or an expanding toolbox that allows me to, again, kind of converse with these systems, brainstorm as a more of a collaboration partner and
Mm-hmm.
reach insights that wouldn't have otherwise been possible. But in my limited experience, and in fact, I've written about this for Scholar AI and elsewhere, um, AI right now doesn't plan very well. It's not very good at helping people understand the questions they should be asking. Instead, it's much better at the actual execution of things once the human, me or whomever in this case,
Do
is
you look at that
telling.
as do you look at that
Hmm?
as different from like when I look at like what the O models are, like with reasoning being like I'm going to be thoughtful about my steps first before telling a response. Do you look at the planning and the reasoning as two separate things?
I do because, and maybe it's an important, perhaps, semantic
Mm-hmm.
discussion. And when I say planning, what I mean is if you ask open-ended questions to the AI, such as like, what important discoveries or what important insights should I be looking for in my scientific work, right? Where is kind of the greenfield opportunity? What kind of equations, what experiments haven't been done? It's very bad at generating those ideas. If you instead say,
Mm-hmm.
I want to achieve X, how do I achieve X? That type of planning is actually very good at, especially with the reasoning
Mm-hmm.
models, where it does take multi-steps to say, start here, then go here, and then go, to step three and so on. I do find it to be quite good at helping with that, especially if you can feed in real world data back into the system, right? It helps plan an
Mm-hmm.
experiment. I execute that experiment. I return the data back to it, ask it then what to do next, right? Or say, no, that didn't work. Help me find, alternatives to let me use a tangible example. I'm working on a biosensor right now for a drug in which people, when they're on this drug, they have to be monitored throughout the course of their lifetime. This drug is specific for people that receive new organs. So people are very, very sick. They have to go on this drug, and this drug helps them live happy and healthy lives. This drug is difficult to detect in blood because it goes inside of red blood cells and it binds to a protein inside the red blood cells. And so what I needed was a precise buffer that would help me detect this drug in blood, effectively debinding it from its protein, but not debinding it so strongly that it broke my
Mm-hmm.
biosensor. And so
Yep.
trying to thread that needle, if you will, what I've been able to do is I've been able to generate a list of testable buffers with AI that I wouldn't have otherwise thought about. And now I can go actually apply that in the real world, bring it back results and iterate from there. And actually that's the
Mm-hmm.
process I'm undergoing right now. So we've seen some success in those. And I wouldn't necessarily call them new buffers, but they're again buffers kind of across domains in science that I just simply wouldn't have found as easily and maybe never would have found
The
without kind of that
discovery
inspiration.
step, yeah,
Correct.
discovery. I see. What
Correct.
is
Yeah.
like we were talking when me and Josh were talking about just like what it's like to be building today. We're talking a lot about like what our tools and what our workflow was. And obviously, again, you've been building, you've been coding, but really curious if you have like a kind of defined workflow that like if another PhD or another researcher is listening to this podcast that may not be like super comfortable with AI, like how would you recommend that they get started using these tools and ways in which they can integrate it, which makes it very effective for getting better research done?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So I would break it into two phases. If they're in the reading phase and kind of in the self-discovery phase, then I really do just like the very simple workflow of upload the PDF of whatever you're interacting with and then interact with that PDF as if it were a person. Ask it questions, you can dive into certain aspects, you can go find specific text. The thing that I don't like about the public user interfaces that are available, whether that's ChatGPT or Claude via Anthropic or otherwise, is that you can't see exactly where the answers are coming from. Like that viewer isn't perfect yet. And so I would
Mm-hmm.
like to see improvements on the viewer side, which I know we're working on and I think others are as well. But as far as getting the information out of a single or even multiple PDFs, I find it very good. So I basically am now reading papers still in the traditional sense that I'm reading them top to bottom. But then after I read them top to bottom, rather than trying to go back and reread specific questions myself, I usually find that interacting with these AI systems to pull those insights out is faster.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I can do it more thoughtfully than before. The other thing that I'm doing is once I get data, depending on the kind of data and my familiarity with looking at those particular data sets, I'm going to upload that data set to an AI and just ask it to tell me about it.
Hmm.
Ask it to tell me about the different ways I could be analyzing it, asking about
Hmm.
the standard ways that other people across the literature are analyzing these particular data sets. And then just going through this multi-layer analysis to where maybe before I was doing one or two types of analysis on a data set. Now I'm doing five or six because the AI can tell me about these new ones and usually can perform them. Right.
Hmm.
It can write the code to perform the data set or otherwise. And so in that way, I've kind of become more of a data scientist, just given that
Hmm.
like I can work with these systems to say, do data discovery around this real world data. Tell me how other people would look at this data. Tell me how people might critique this data. Right? What follow-on experiments might I do in order to make this data more robust or to um, try and dispute it,
Yeah.
perhaps those kind of things. And so I find that way. And then the other thing that I think has been a real unlock recently that I wish I would have had early on in my PhD career is anytime I'm learning new equipment, I'm running these things as kind of a co-pilot while I'm learning that new equipment, asking it questions about the equipment, either about the technique
Hmm.
overall or the very specific instrument I'm using. Sometimes troubleshooting or sometimes just like standard procedure. Why is it telling me to do this? Why does it function this way? I'm getting these results. Why is that? What can I kind of expect?
I see. With in general, like I think one thing that might be that's interesting, I think, compared to like what I'm used to hearing, again, with engineers and technical folk who are coding with AI tools, is both Josh and I, like I especially, like I know I've learned to just like almost not blindly trust, but like I take a lot of what the AI outputs as like good enough to solve my use case. And typically, what I do is if I'm coding, I will talk to it. I'll have it generate code. I'll throw that code in. If the result goes awry, then I'll have to revisit that stuff and then manually intervene. But it sounds like your process, probably as a scientist, is more of like, I know that if I let AI take these steps, it is prone to inaccuracy. So I'm going to do my own first pass first, or ask it to give me an approach rather than actually telling it to do the data science or give me the paper summary before I read.
Yeah, basically, I kind of would break it down in three phases. I ask it what it would do. I then have it do the thing it told me it would do, and then I manually review it to the best of my ability.
Uh-huh.
And I'm saying, and again, once the AI helps you set an expectation for what you should be seeing, then even if you don't have expansive experience with that thing before, you can become a critical reviewer if you're willing to do a little bit of investigation, right? So like even if
Mhm.
I haven't run that analysis before, if I ask the AI to first explain the analysis, then perform the analysis, I can see if the performed analysis matches the expectations that the AI set. And while it's not a perfect check, it is kind of a second layer check that allows me to say, did this thing go, off the wall
Mhm.
or not? And then again, no matter what, and this is true of AI systems or not, I'm always verifying whatever conclusions I'm arriving at with other sources as well. Does this match
Yep.
expectations across the literature? Is there any refutable, any evidence refuting the hypothesis I might be drawing here? And so you're
Mhm.
always doing kind of second, third, fourth order, verification, if you will, on anything. But the thing that is most exciting is kind of what you described, right? It's playing a real world experiment I can go run. Let me then go run that real world experiment and then help me analyze the results with layers of depth that I wouldn't otherwise be able to analyze them
Mhm.
with.
What do you think has to happen for you to be comfortable removing the third and second order verification steps? Like, I think
It's a
at
good,
what point do you,
yeah,
yeah, like what
yeah.
point do you like take the rule like wheels? I'll just watch you do your thing and you're okay.
I think in short, never. And I think that just comes from my experience in science. It's like that's just not how science is done, right? There is a peer review
Mhm.
process, even if people are concluding it, right? There is kind of this show and tell aspect of it. So like even in a hypothetical where AI could plan experiment, execute experiment, and present data, I would
Mhm.
still like kind of an X-ray view into that process so that I could supervise. Even if I was coming back after the fact to that data, I would still have follow-up questions and I would still be verifying the results it found and kind of stating whether they were corroborated across the existing body of knowledge or not. That's kind of what a scientist does, right? Like here's this new
Mhm.
observation I found. This either supports or refutes my initial hypothesis. Also, this is, in agreement or counter to what is known across the body of literature. You don't
Mhm.
necessarily, science is not necessarily meant to be written as a final conclusion. It's more or less meant to be an observation of
Mhm.
facts, and then some of those observations get contextualized into some sort of narrative story, which is I think great. But again, I would just use AI as an enabler throughout. that
Mhm.
process. I do think we're going to see AI planning, running, and analyzing experiments, but I don't know that we'll ever see a day in which we are just simply saying, we believe you, and then,
Yeah.
going on. So
Kind of segueing to more of like the societal level of what it means for science. I know I've had friends who they're in their PhDs right now and they've complained that they've gotten peer reviewed. And like, I mean, again, most of my friends who are researchers hate the peer review process just in general, but they've complained and I felt like they've like anecdotally observed like this person just reviewed my paper using AI. Like they didn't actually try to understand the depth of it and they're going into it as a reviewer using AI. What do you think happens to what the process that is peer review, publishing, all that sort of stuff becomes if AI writing becomes more common?
yeah, I think we are probably are headed for a world in which you're getting a lot of systems written by AI and then thereby reviewed by AI. And I
Hmm.
think we've had this conversation about the dead internet theory. Like, I think certainly there are going to be aspects of that that bleed into science. I think that the trouble with this in the practical sense is that kind of by definition, not speaking about review papers or anything like this, thinking about just specifically novel scientific papers, those are by definition trying to contribute new knowledge to the kind of existing body of literature. As we know, these large language models in their current state are more regression machines.
Hmm.
They're able to kind of find the consensus, that kind of thing. And so I think that as a pure review agent, there are still some gaps that need to be filled in order for a large language model to truly be capable of that
Hmm.
task, right? Because that task fundamentally involves assessing the presentation of new knowledge and then using the stated experiments and methods inside of that manuscript to say, are these new conclusions that shouldn't exist anywhere else if they're truly novel, backed up by the process and the experiments outlined in this paper? That's
Hmm.
the assessment that the reviewer is trying to do, right? Are these conclusions reasonably supported by the work presented here and the existing body of knowledge? If yes, move it down. If not, recommend revisions or review, et cetera. And so AI certainly has a place there because especially in that last thing I said, which is new conclusions backed by results presented in this paper and in the body of prior existing knowledge. Basically, that prior
Hmm.
existing knowledge is becoming ever more expansive, and so you need some of these tools to be able to kind of tell a reviewer all of the maybe nuance they're unaware of. Right, like when I'm reviewing a paper, I may not be an expert in a particular aspect of it, whereas I am maybe an expert in a different aspect. Now I can be much more informed about about the kind of aspects that I'm not an expert in ways that
Hmm.
simply again weren't possible before.
I see. How are your peers using like AI tools? Like, would you say that you're more advanced compared to most people in being AI native? Like, where do you think it lands? Obviously, going to Duke, I imagine folks are relatively tech forward, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do. I don't know anyone that's not using it at all. Meaning, like
okay.
everybody is at least playing around with ChatGPT. Everybody's at least playing around with like, can this thing help me find papers? Can this thing help me plan experiments? Can this thing help me with my writing or help me with my review process or otherwise? People are certainly integrating it into their own workflows. Everybody right now is doing so with a little bit of hesitancy in the sense that they know it hallucinates, they know it makes stuff up. So they're still relying on being able to go and find that PDF themselves, being able to go and click
Hmm.
on the DOI to actually be able to use it. But as far as writing first drafts of
Hmm.
things, I see a lot of people at least templating with the AI, if not generating parts of those drafts directly. And I also see a lot of language to language translation, right? Because you have a
Hmm.
lot of people who don't speak in English as their primary language, but science is obviously disseminated in English for a majority of the world. And so that translation step is perhaps the most kind of probably the most ubiquitous use case. I would
Hmm.
say that's anecdotal for sure, but I think
Yeah,
I'd be fairly confident in saying that's a fairly general observation.
I see. What, so I guess like, if we're to take like a high level, like AI coding had a really big moment with what Cursor is, right? Everyone moved from ChatGPT and Anthropic and copying and pasting results into their code editors. What do you think like the Cursor for science ends up being able to do? Like, what is that product or
Yeah,
tool capable of?
it. I think the shortest answer I can give you is that it enables people to run better experiments and eliminates the wasteful experiments that currently happen. And there's pros and cons to the wasteful experiments, but what happens right now in science, simply because like by definition it is discovery, is you have a lot of
Mhm.
things that you try that simply don't work. I think
Yeah.
that the greatest hope for AI in science specifically is that more of the things scientists try will work and will have the intended consequences, and less
Mhm.
of the things they try won't work.
Yeah, I see. But what do you think that like, does that mean simulation? Does that mean like, is it the planning step? Does it mean in an ideal future, there's actually something that's able to run the experiment in some like virtual environment?
Yeah, I do think we have. So, like a lot of the experiments we run in our lab right now are robot assisted or robot designed, and I mean,
Hmm.
like I don't mean human like robot. I mean
Yeah.
simple programmatic robotic arms handling liquids, moving, things one way or the other. In the same way that robot assisted fabrication of electronics has been the state of
Yeah.
the art for decades. I think that simulation, absolutely. I think that kind of not necessarily simulation in the sense of generating synthetic results, although I do think that's going to happen. I think simulation in the sense that you're going to have a lot of scientists, especially early scientists, that are helped in not doing some of the more foolish things they would have
Yeah.
otherwise done, right? Mixing a chemical in a chemical reaction that renders the entire results completely null and void because two chemicals reacted in a way that student wasn't aware of. And usually that's not
Mhm.
harmful reactions. It's just simply like, you have the pH at the wrong level. Therefore, biology in the way that it should happen can't happen because you forgot to
Yeah.
adjust this one kind of small dial, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you're just going to start to seeing, again, if you just improve the efficiency of every
Hmm.
experiment run by 10%, you're going to have a lot more successful experiments, right? And you're reducing the amount of human error, especially in the planning phase, is going to be substantial. And then
I
as
see.
soon as you get to a stage where synthetic data is actually reliable in the sense that
Mhm.
like it can simulate 10 hypothetical outcomes and it has that high level of accuracy in doing so, then
Mhm.
yeah, you're going to get accelerated experimentation. So we've already seen some emerging papers about people that are doing novel therapeutics that are designed almost entirely with some version of AI or with a large language model or some kind of specialized, fine-tuned um, model that's for antibodies or whatever biomolecules, small molecules, whatever it is.
Segueing a bit. So we talked a lot about science. We talked about a lot about like how it is researching with AI and like the things that worked. But you're also a business person. You're also someone who can create product and show it to people. Shash and I talked a lot about just our literal process for coding, but we're both technical first. We were, like he was a CTO back in his first startup. I'm an engineer by trade. I would be curious as to just like a high level summary or I guess like reflection on building businesses with AI coding tools. Obviously, you've built a lot of small prototypes and you've shown people those sort of things. But I'd love to hear for someone who's not a coder first, how the process of building has been, what's felt rocky, what hasn't.
Yeah. So the short version of this is communication has improved significantly. And you said it correctly in that the speed at which things can be prototyped is much faster than it used to be. And what that enables you to do is it enables you to move much faster into the show and tell phase. And so you can go into every meeting prepped with something that the user can actually get their hands on, they can actually try. And that way, the feedback that comes back to you is much more useful. It's much more robust than what it would have been if it was just an idea, right? A
Mhm.
document that was text only, or even a Figma prototype, right? It's just kind of been replaced by this idea to very quickly spin up a clickable functional demo that can be used.
Mhm. How have you, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this internally, but how have you found that I'd love for you to share the general insight of what you ended up finding, but software becoming commodity and what that means for selling.
Yeah, I think that so there's a high level discussion and there's a very kind of tangible discussion around how it has been used internally. As I said, I was not someone who would have considered myself able to write software 2 years ago. Could I do a little bit of data science? Absolutely. Was I doing some Python programming to look through and analyze data? Yes, but could I actually build a web app? Could I build a mobile app? No. Now I can. And what that means is any tool that doesn't very specifically address my needs out of the box incentivizes me to build my own. And I'm just one person. And I've seen that kind of proliferate through the organizations that I've worked with, in which the idea of build versus buy is leaning more strongly, at least in the early days, towards build than it is buy. Some of that's the unknown. Some of that's the excitement around what these AI tools have made possible. Some of the people that are just willing or kind of wanting rather to kind of own their thing, to have their kind of secret sauce imbued in a product that they develop. There's something novel and interesting about that. I think water will find its level so to speak, in that like right now the seesaw that is very heavily build, whereas before it was very heavily buy, will kind of arc back to kind of
Mhm.
more of an equilibrium. But I do think that we are fundamentally in a different world in which a lot of SaaS apps for a long time were kind of crud database wrappers, right? Kind of no more than that. And I think we're headed for a reality in which what you have in the next state is large language models or whatever the emergent systems become wrappers. And
Mhm.
people are have some sort of horizontal product they probably pay for, but also have specific agentic workflows or things like that that they're also designing and building in-house and kind of owning. I also think, as a tangent to this, you're going to start to see it in the hiring market as well, in which companies will not only be hiring candidates in the human form, but they'll also be kind of recruiting and hiring candidates who bring their own unique agentic workflows to the
Mm.
organizations that they can then kind of proliferate across.
So looking at what SaaS has been, like we're out of the ZERP era was very, very long ago where there's just VC money flowing into every single SaaS. And again, for those who don't know, Damon also has involvement in like VC organizations. Where do you see, like, again, knowing that you probably, I imagine you mostly field like biotech or like you're responsible for kind of fielding biotech in your org, but where have you seen there's still clear value in software like SaaS, like vanilla SaaS? Where is it still sticking?
Yeah, so I do just to add the context. I do mostly life science and AI. So I'm positioned basically on both those pillars. So I do that kind of across the organization that I work with, like you said. And life science is life science, right? Med devices, new drugs, just those things have to work. And so that thing, that, again, other than what we've talked about in maybe AI's ability to accelerate the development of those things, the business model is still very much the same, right? You're still selling into insured or uninsured places. You're still trying to give people better, help you improve quality of lives. And
Mm.
for AI specifically, we are seeing a shakeup in the SaaS market. People are kind of beginning to look at these systems, and what has been kind of the best business model over the last couple of decades in high margin SaaS business is now under attack in a way that we haven't seen before.
Mhm.
And again, it's being replaced with this argument of build versus buy. And it's also kind of being shaken and saying this is a new platform, and similar to the transition between web and mobile. People, I think, are looking to the future saying, are we interacting with computers in the same way anymore? Does voice
Mhm.
become the new interface, right? Do we have agents working behind the scenes for us? And if so, what does that look like? Right? What are you actually paying
Yeah.
for? Right? Do you need that database wrapper anymore if humans aren't actually looking at the data, right? If they're just receiving the PDF reports or, the dashboards or kind of whatever, what does it actually look like? And so, I would still say that product market fit is still evaluated in the same sense it always has. But I think the operating costs for a lot of these AI companies are different in the sense that they can be lighter in headcount,
Mhm.
especially, right? People are doing more with fewer people.
Yep.
Organizations, companies are doing more with fewer people. And so like that's something that we've seen that has been consistently across the board. That does have uh, influence of both AI and, like you said, these macroeconomic factors. Borrowing money to than it was 2, 3 years ago. VC as a market is suppressed significantly relative to 2, 3 years ago.
What do you mean
So I think
suppressed?
there's
I'm
fewer
just not
dollars.
aware. Yeah.
There's
I
fewer
see.
dollars
Okay.
in the entire ecosystem overall. There's fewer dollars. Some of that stems from the fact that funds are having to support valuations that peaked in 20 and 21, in which they're kind of now having to
Mm.
funnel back. The companies that raised probably when they shouldn't have, they took on more capital when they should have. They probably raised at valuations that were out over their skis,
Yep.
metaphorically, and so we're suffering some of the ramifications of that. I think what that ultimately means is some of the companies that are funded right now are going to be some of the most profitable in terms of venture back returns in history, just because right now some of the companies, especially not AI companies, are having a really hard time raising. And so those valuations are kind of marked to market or maybe even undervalued right now, which I think is interesting.
Mm. What sort of like company? So you're fielding AI companies still. What have you seen what are the sort of products that still get deal flow, and where are the ones that have stopped getting deal flow? Like where
Yeah.
is the build versus buy distinction very
Yeah.
clear?
Yeah. So the things that get the most kind of automatic investment across the board are still vertical app companies,
Okay.
right? It's AI for healthcare. It's AI for law. It's AI for procurement. It's AI for some niche industry in which the organizations themselves aren't going to build it because they're not really knowledge workers in the traditional sense that they're not sitting at a keyboard all day long,
Hmm.
right? Or they are, and they're doing very different work. Like a lawyer probably is sitting at a keyboard most of their day, but they're not thinking about new software tools to build, or they're like reviewing legal cases. They're thinking about crafting arguments. Similarly, physicians, nurses, healthcare providers, they are interacting with patients on the business. They're not thinking about like, how do I better build my AI scribe, right? But
Hmm.
at the same time, both legalese, medical jargon, et cetera, demand a little bit more of a curated product than your traditional knowledge worker in kind of, general business, white collar work, that kind of thing. And so we're still seeing a large sum of those. Yet find that we're also seeing the alternative to that, I would say, is companies in which their advantage lies on the distribution side. So the product itself might be heavily commoditized, but these people are well integrated in the network in which they're going to sell, or they have a particular sales hook that the investors are betting on will kind of sustain them through the stages of growth that will have them outlasting other companies. So not necessarily winning on product, but winning on process.
I see. So you as a VC, like with all the AI companies you've seen out in the market, she actually kind of did this fun exercise. I wish I had the link, but there was a chart for the secondary market of companies that haven't gone public yet, but you can somehow access their trades, and what are the values of those shares. I'd be curious if you just kind of took a high level pass at like what are some of the hot companies right now. So ignoring, well, we can include OpenAI, Anthropic. You can look at like Databricks. You can look at Perplexity. Just anyone kind of involved in the AI kind of SaaS space. I'd be curious who you're bullish on and who you're bearish on.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think avoiding the obvious ones, like I think there's some obvious value in Databricks. I think is actually a
Mhm.
really, probably an undervalued company in the space that they're in because they can provide some of the connective tissue that's necessary, and they're not a model provider company. I actually think that if I
Mhm.
was going to make a bear case for the OpenAI, the Anthropics of the world, it's that the cost of intelligence, so to speak, is probably
Mhm.
going close to zero. And so I don't know that you'd want to be a very specific model provider company. I think the bull case for those companies is that they're not just model providers, but they're model providers plus applications, right? They have Claude, they have ChatGPT, they have those kind of things. They have, ChatGPT government, et cetera. So I actually think those companies aren't just model companies, but if you were specifically a model company, I think that's probably not a great place to be playing in right
Mhm.
now. I'm most bullish on SpaceX, if I'm being very honest. I mean, that company, in my estimation, is incredible. It's a better, cheaper service with a kind of hardware and executional moat that is simply unmatched. I mean, sending
Yeah.
satellites into space is just hard. So just
Mhm.
very simply, it's very hard. So like, there is no opportunity for fast follow because for as good as software companies are, the high margins, et cetera, there's always the danger of fast follow, right? Somebody
Yep.
can always kind of commoditize, if not the entire thing, a large fraction of your product and usually offer it as good enough, right? I
Mhm.
think the other thing that I would be looking at right now, and I don't have an overall lean here yet, but one of the things, I guess there are two kind of related and somewhat complementary thoughts. Number one, it feels to me like right now is the best time to build a consumer app,
Mhm.
maybe in history. Because again, you can do more with less in the sense that you can build faster, you can build better with fewer people. So you don't have to have the amount of revenue on a per user basis that has kind of traditionally been the case because you can deal with higher churn, right? Because
Yep.
you can build leaner. So I think right now is a very interesting time to be building in consumer. So if I was going to look into the private markets, I'd be saying who is really hitting home run with consumer retention.
Mhm.
Duolingo maybe is kind of the
Yeah.
penultimate, maybe the example, paragon example there. I think that would be really interesting. And I think additionally to that, I think you'd have companies that are attacking markets that were previously too small. Think like dental, veterinary, geographically specific real estate, those kind of things, that are selling services into those companies that previously wouldn't have been a large enough market for people to care about, but that may be now because of AI, right? So
Mm.
you're not just selling them an AI product in the traditional sense, but you're selling them a service in which you can almost bill them at a near human like level, right? $10,000 per year, $20,000 per year to execute against these workflows. I think both those kind of domains as a whole
Mm.
are very interesting. If people are, and if you're going to nail me down to a company or two, I think SpaceX again would get my vote as number one. That's probably a fairly obvious one. I think there are some other Databricks, very, very much Stripe. Again, Stripe's, a
Mhm.
financial company that I think is public, but maybe falling slightly outside of the mainstream. But we use Stripe. We love Stripe. They're so good, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
so good. It's so easy to integrate. So I mean, I think that you know, even if the valuation might be not necessarily undervalued, those companies are still just so strong. It's hard not
Mhm.
to make a bull case for them.
With the biotech space, so SpaceX, you kind of alluded to, they're just doing something that's so fundamentally hard that fast follow is difficult. And biotech, obviously, there's all sorts of ways that you can approach that. There's devices, there's drugs, there's all sorts of things. But do you look at like, are there a collection of companies you look at as like SpaceX equivalents for biotech?
Not usually. And the reason
Yeah.
being is primarily driven by most of the startups that achieve breakout success get bought by the largest companies very early.
Hmm.
So basically,
Like hero drug use cases or hero
yeah,
device use
yeah.
cases.
So
I see.
basically, both of those things. Usually, what ends up happening is as they're approaching FDA approval, if they're headed down that path, they get acquired. Phase two, a new drug comes out in phase two. Johnson and Johnson, Eli Lilly, pick your favorite drug supplier. Major company is going to buy up a lot of that IP, buy up a lot of those practices, and they're going to go ahead and finish development of that drug and kind of enter the sphere. So like it's a more challenging market. That market's also very hard in the sense that it's very capital intensive in the same way that
Mhm.
SpaceX is, but it's highly regulated and sometimes less clear if it's going to work. Like
Mhm.
the idea of sending a satellite into space is yes, very hard, but you kind of know when it works, right? You got a
Yeah.
satellite up there. Drugs have undiscovered long tail effects that can be difficult to categorize, even in the most rigorous testing phases. Right before you get it
Mhm.
out to people, you simply don't know how it's going to be. And so there's some inherent risk and volatility involved there that actually makes speculating in the life science market harder. And to be fair, I spend more time in the med device space than I
Mhm.
do in the therapeutics because of that reason. My number one, my expertise is not necessarily in chemical therapeutics; it's much more in the biosensor diagnostic medical device world. So I spend a lot of time playing in those, and we've seen some successes. But the unstated challenge there is that usually those exit for lower multiples, and so
Mhm.
there's this kind of give and take in the life sciences of you're either a drug company and you're going for the biggest payout with the highest risk, or you're a med device company who's maybe trying to get the double or a triple instead of the home run. And looking for success that way. The thing that keeps drawing back to the life sciences overall is that you know similar to SpaceX, but unlike B2B SaaS, the quality of human life improves with the success. So
Mhm.
the success is not just financial. Whereas B2B SaaS, yes, there are marginal efficiency gains, but for the most part, the quality of human life
Like
is
your database
unchanged.
is not saving the world
Correct.
or something.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Like
Yeah.
Salesforce is an amplifier for productivity, but has it made the world better? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? In some cases, you could make the argument that some of these companies are even making the world worse. I'm not necessarily a person that believes
Yeah.
that, but the people have made a compelling case that Meta, for example, is net negative. I don't think anyone's going to
Yeah.
make the case that SpaceX, at least as we understand it today, is net negative. Similarly,
Mhm.
um, there's some challenges in the life sciences, no doubt, but when something actually works, people's lives do better.
Cool. I think that's a wonderful place to leave it for the day. So I'll try to do my best to do a Damon outro. Thank you for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, and catch us next week for the next episode of the Founders Pod. Bye.